What if the real you only shows up once you vanish from the version of life you've been performing? Stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you goes against everything modern culture has taught you about growth, visibility, and success. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the hidden architecture of the human psyche, proposed something radical, something most people never truly understand. He said that to become whole, you must first disappear. Not physically, not by running away, but psychologically. You must step back from the identities you've constructed, the masks you've worn, the performances you've perfected. Only then can you meet the person you've been hiding from all along, yourself. How much of your daily life is performance? How many of your choices are made to maintain an image, to secure approval, to avoid rejection? When was the last time you sat in complete silence, no phone, no music, no distractions, and asked yourself who you actually are beneath all the noise? Most people never do this, because most people are terrified of what they might find. We live in a culture that glorifies constant visibility. Post your wins, document your journey, share your thoughts, build your brand. From the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep, we're performing, curating, editing, optimizing. We've been conditioned to believe that growth happens in public, that transformation requires an audience, that authenticity is something you broadcast. But Jung understood something our hyper-connected world has forgotten. Real transformation happens in the dark, in withdrawal, in silence, in absence. He called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating the unconscious aspects of yourself into conscious awareness. But individuation doesn't begin with self-help books or motivational quotes. It begins when you stop performing long enough to hear the voice you've been drowning out. Consider the archetype of the performer. The performer has mastered the art of being seen. She knows which version of herself gets the most approval in any given situation. She adjusts her tone, her opinions, her energy to match the room. She's likable, agreeable, successful by external measures. But here's the tragedy. The performer has fragmented herself so thoroughly across so many roles that she no longer knows which pieces are real. She wakes up exhausted, not from doing too much, but from being too many different people. And beneath all the applause, there's a gnawing emptiness, a sense that she's living someone else's life in her own body. Does this sound familiar? The performer isn't a villain. She's a survival mechanism. Because at some point, probably early in life, you learned that being your authentic self wasn't safe. Maybe you were punished for expressing anger. Maybe you were ignored when you showed vulnerability. Maybe you learned that love was conditional, something you had to earn by being good, accomplished, palatable. So you adapted. You became whoever you needed to be to survive. And over time, those adaptations calcified into identities. Identities you now mistake for your true self. Now consider another archetype, the disappeared one. This is the person who withdraws, who stops showing up to the party, literally and metaphorically, who cancels plans, who goes quiet on social media, who needs long stretches of solitude. From the outside, the disappeared one often looks depressed, detached, or avoidant. People worry. They ask what's wrong. They try to pull you back into the noise. But here's what they don't understand. The disappeared one isn't running away from life. She's running towards something deeper. She's entered what Jung would call the night sea journey, a descent into the unconscious to confront what's been hidden. This isn't escapism. It's the opposite. It's the willingness to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding your entire life. Jung called this shadow work. The shadow is everything you've denied, repressed, rejected about yourself. The anger you weren't allowed to express. The selfishness you were taught was shameful. The ambition that felt too threatening. The desires that didn't fit the script. All of it gets pushed down into the unconscious. But it doesn't disappear. It festers. It leaks out in self-sabotage, in projection, in inexplicable anxiety, until you turn around and face it. There's a moment in this process, a moment everyone who does this work eventually reaches, where you encounter what might be called the shadow stranger. This is the denied self, the part of you that rises when the noise finally stops and says, "Where have you been?" It's painful, disorienting, sometimes terrifying. Because the shadow stranger doesn't speak in the polite, edited language you've learned to use. It speaks in raw truth. It tells you about the resentment you've been swallowing for years, about the grief you never processed, about the rage you turned inward because you had nowhere safe to put it, about the parts of you that feel inadequate, unlovable, broken. This is why most people never complete the process, because confronting the shadow requires something modern culture actively discourages. Honesty without audience, discomfort without distraction, growth without applause. You can't perform your way through shadow work. You can't Instagram your way to wholeness. This part of the journey happens alone, in the silence you've been avoiding. Let's talk about fear for a moment. Because beneath all of this, beneath the performing, the masks, the noise, is one fundamental terror. The fear of being seen and not accepted. Think about it. If you show up as your full, unedited self and people reject you, that's devastating. But if you show up as a carefully constructed version of yourself and people reject that, well, at least they didn't reject the real you. At least you're still safe. This is the ego's logic. The ego, the part of you that manages your conscious identity, believes it's protecting you by maintaining control. It thinks, if I can just be perfect enough, accomplished enough, likable enough, then I'll finally be safe. But here's the paradox Jung understood. The ego's attempt to control is exactly what prevents you from accessing your true self, the deeper, more integrated center of who you are. The self doesn't emerge through control. It emerges through surrender, through stepping back from the performance and asking, who am I when no one's watching? Now let's be clear about the consequences if we don't do this work. If you stay in performance mode indefinitely, 3 things happen. First, you become perpetually dependent on external validation. Your sense of worth rises and falls based on likes, compliments, achievements, things entirely outside your control. You're never at peace because you're always scanning the environment for approval signals. Second, your relationships become transactional and shallow. Because you're not showing up as your real self, you can only connect with people at the level of the mask. You're surrounded by people who like the version of you you've constructed. But you're deeply alone. Because the real you is still hidden, still unseen, still unmet. Third, you reach the end of your life and realize you never actually lived it. You performed it. You optimized it. You documented it. But you never inhabited it fully as yourself. This is the quiet tragedy Jung warned against. A life consumed by busyness, distraction, and performance, but never truly lived, so here's the choice. Path A. Stay visible. Keep wearing the masks. Keep adjusting your truth to fit the situation. Keep chasing approval from people who don't really know you. Stay safe. Stay liked. Stay trapped. Or path B, disappear and rebuild. Enter the silence. Face the shadow. Integrate the hidden parts of yourself. Let the old identities die, not through destruction, but through transformation, and return as someone fundamentally different. Someone who can't be manipulated by approval or derailed by rejection. Someone whose presence carries a weight, a clarity, a groundedness that comes from internal coherence. Someone who has met themselves in the dark and survived. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. Whole means integrating everything, the light and the shadow, the acceptable and the rejected, the strong and the vulnerable. It means you stop fragmenting yourself across different contexts and start showing up as one coherent person. And here's what nobody tells you about this process. Once you complete it, you become unalignable with shallow scripts. You can't go back to performing. Not because you're morally superior, but because it becomes physically uncomfortable to betray yourself. Your tolerance for inauthenticity in yourself and others drops to zero. This doesn't make you rigid. It makes you free, because you're no longer controlled by fear of rejection. You know who you are, and that knowledge is unshakable. So let me leave you with 3 questions. These aren't rhetorical. Sit with them. Actually answer them for yourself. Where are you still performing for acceptance? What part of you rises when the noise stops? What mask are you finally willing to let die? If you can't answer these questions clearly, you're not ready yet. And that's okay. This work has its own timing. But if something in you stirred while hearing this, if something clicked or ached or felt uncomfortably true, then maybe it's time. Time to disappear for a while. Not forever. Not as escape, but as descent. Sit with the silence. Let the shadow speak. Face the stranger you've been running from. Because when you return, and you will return, you won't just find yourself. You'll become someone who can never be lost again. The choice is yours.